My parents said I was good for nothing, and they regretted having me as their son. I smiled and left them to start a business in another city. They never called me until 4 years later when they heard I was the CEO of the biggest furniture company in the city. Mom called me saying she wanted to visit. What happened next wasn't what I expected at all. Tell me what your first reaction will be if you were in my shoes and you saw that first call from her after 4 years. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel to support us. It will be great to know in the comments section where you are listening from. Now let me tell you everything that happened. I used to think all families had a favorite child, and maybe that was true. But in our house, it was less about favoritism and more about hierarchy. A pecking order where I was always at the bottom, scraping for crumbs while Andrew, my younger brother, was fed with silver spoons and served compliments on porcelain plates. My name is Jason, and I was the eldest son of two people who never missed an opportunity to remind me of how deeply I disappointed them. It wasn't always spoken outright, but you didn't need words when every look, every sigh, every comparison made it painfully clear. Andrew got A's. He was brilliant. I got B's. I was lazy. Andrew forgot to mow the lawn. He's tired. I forgot. You're good for nothing. That phrase stuck to me like old gum on a shoe. Annoying, persistent, and impossible to ignore. And it was always delivered with this dry, detached tone, like they weren't even mad, just stating a fact. Good for nothing. They said it so often it started to sound like my name. I remember one night in particular. I was 19, a sophomore in college, back home for the weekend. I had just scraped together enough courage to tell them I'd changed my major from engineering to business. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd understand. I sat at the dinner table, trying not to fidget, trying to look confident even though my hands were shaking under the table. Mom was serving roast chicken, her way of pretending everything was normal. Dad sipped his beer, eyes fixed on the TV in the corner. When I finally told them, Dad turned off the volume, but not the screen. He didn't even look at me. Figures, he said after a long pause. Can't even handle real work. Of course you'd pick something soft. Mom didn't say anything. She just sighed and passed the salt to Andrew, who looked at me like I'd announced I was joining the circus. That was the moment I realized they weren't disappointed because I failed. They were disappointed because I didn't become the version of me they had invented in their heads. The golden child they never got, the one they thought Andrew might be. I held on to that hurt longer than I should have. I carried it like a backpack full of bricks everywhere I went. On the bus, in the classroom, at every job I took just to stay afloat. But what broke me wasn't the words themselves. It was that cold, casual delivery, like I didn't matter enough to even be argued with. Like they had already given up on me years ago and were just waiting for me to disappear. And for a long time, I stayed. I stayed because I thought if I just worked harder, just tried a little more, maybe I'd earn something close to love. Or at least approval. But it never came. I watched Andrew coast through life, failing classes, skipping chores, and getting praised for trying. I got a job while studying full-time, and all I got was a lecture about how I wasn't doing enough. They never asked if I was tired. They never asked if I was okay. They just assumed that if I wasn't excelling, I must be slacking. The final straw came on a Sunday afternoon. We were all sitting in the living room. Me, Mom, Dad, and Andrew. Some family friend had stopped by earlier and mentioned how hard it was for kids to find direction these days. Dad laughed and looked right at me. Tell me about it. This one's still wasting space and oxygen. Then he chuckled like it was a joke, like calling your son useless in front of other people was just harmless banter. I laughed too, but it wasn't real. It was the kind of laugh you let out when your heart cracks, and you're too proud to let anyone hear the sound it makes. I stood up, walked to my room, and packed a single bag. Just clothes, my laptop, and a notebook where I scribbled down every idea I ever had. Most of them half-formed, wild dreams that didn't seem possible yet. I didn't slam the door. I didn't make a scene. I just left. I figured if they thought I was good for nothing, then disappearing wouldn't be a loss. That night, I rode a Greyhound bus into a city I'd only visited once. I had $287 in my bank account and no place to stay. But for the first time in my life, I felt something strange, relief. No more dinners where I had to swallow shame along with dry chicken. No more mornings waking up to glares and silent disapproval. I was free. It was terrifying and lonely, but it was mine. I found a rundown hostel and paid for 3 nights up front. I took odd jobs, dishwashing, unloading trucks, sweeping construction sites. Whatever paid. And at night, I'd open that notebook, stare at those scribbled furniture sketches, and tell myself I wasn't crazy. I could do this. I just needed time, space, and no one calling me worthless every other day. It didn't take long before I stopped checking my phone. They hadn't called. Not even once. No messages, no emails, not even a half-hearted, "Where are you?" That silence was louder than any insult. But instead of crushing me, it carved out something in me, something tough and rooted. I started to believe that maybe I didn't need their love to make something of myself. Maybe I never did. So I worked. I saved. I took a risk and rented a tiny studio where I started building furniture by hand. Every scar on my palm, every splinter, every sleepless night, those were the only validation I needed. I was building something, and unlike their approval, it couldn't be taken away. That was the beginning, the part they never saw because they weren't there. But I was. I lived every second of it. And someday, they would too. Not because I needed their validation, but because I wanted them to know the good-for-nothing son was doing just fine without them. The studio was barely more than a converted garage tucked behind an old laundromat on the east side of town. The landlord, a wiry man with more stubble than teeth, had taken one look at me and asked, "You sure you can make rent?" I nodded, though I wasn't. It smelled like oil and mildew. The floor was uneven concrete, and the single window looked out into a brick wall, but it was mine. I remember lying on the cold floor that first night, wrapped in a thrift store blanket with my duffel bag as a pillow, and feeling something I hadn't in a long time: hope. It was fragile and barely flickering, like a candle in the wind, but it was there. I knew I didn't have much, not money, not connections, not support, but I had a stubborn kind of grit, the kind that keeps you standing even when life shoves you down. And I had a vision. I could see it, clear as day. Handcrafted furniture, warm wood, clean lines, a space filled with the smell of pine and varnish and quiet pride. I just didn't know yet how to make that vision real. Every morning, I woke up sore and stiff from sleeping on the floor, brushed my teeth in the gas station down the street, and walked to a nearby coffee shop where I applied for a part-time dishwasher job. The manager, a grumpy man named Felix, hired me on the spot, said I looked like I needed it. I did. The pay was garbage, but it was steady, and it gave me access to free food whenever there were leftovers. I washed dishes from dawn until noon, went back to the studio, and spent the afternoon scouring online forums for tips on woodworking. I watched YouTube tutorials like they were gospel. I couldn't afford tools yet, so I started collecting scraps from construction dumpsters, old planks, broken chairs, anything I could repurpose. My hands were always splintered and raw, but I didn't care. Every cut and bruise reminded me that I was working towards something mine. After a few months, I managed to buy a secondhand drill and a basic saw from a pawn shop. That changed everything. I started building small pieces, simple stools, floating shelves, and tables, and listed them on Craigslist. I sold my first piece to a woman named Clara who ran a yoga studio. She said she loved the rustic authenticity. I had no idea what that meant, but I smiled and thanked her like I did. She paid me $60. I stared at that money like it was gold. It wasn't about the amount. It was that someone saw value in something I made with my own hands. That night, I celebrated with a gas station burrito and a lukewarm beer I'd hidden behind some tools. It tasted better than any steak dinner I ever had at home. Over time, the orders trickled in. A coffee shop wanted a set of custom stools. A teacher ordered a bookshelf for her classroom. I didn't sleep much. I was working nights now at a warehouse to make ends meet, but I didn't care. I was building a life from nothing, and every splinter embedded in my fingers felt like proof. The money wasn't great, but I was making just enough to stay afloat. More importantly, I was learning. Every mistake was a lesson. Every returned item, every crack, every crooked edge, it all pushed me to get better. I wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. I was doing it for me. The loneliness hit harder than I expected, though. There were nights when I'd sit in the studio, surrounded by half-finished projects and sawdust, and wonder if anyone would ever really know what I went through. The silence was loud, and it made me think about home. Not because I missed it, but because I didn't. And that scared me. I thought about Mom's soft hands, how they used to braid my hair when I was little. I thought about Dad's booming laugh back when he still looked at me like I mattered. But those memories felt like borrowed clothes, familiar, but no longer mine. I didn't belong to them anymore. I didn't belong to anyone. Then Marcus showed up. He was a delivery guy who brought supplies to the laundromat next door. We'd nod at each other in passing until one day, he wandered into my studio during his lunch break and said, "Smells like ambition in here." I laughed, genuinely, for the first time in weeks. He looked around, asked questions, and didn't judge me when I told him I was still figuring things out. We started talking more. He became a regular fixture, sometimes helping me sand pieces or haul lumber in exchange for lunch. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't ask about my family. He just showed up. That mattered more than I could admit at the time. Marcus was the one who pushed me to think bigger. "You've got talent, man," he said one day, holding up a lamp I'd designed. "Why not brand it?" I laughed at first, but the idea stuck. I spent nights designing a logo, coming up with names, and researching local markets. I landed on Reclaimed Roots, a nod to using salvaged materials and, maybe, to the life I'd left behind. I started an Instagram page, posted pictures of my pieces with corny captions, and offered delivery within the city. It was slow at first, 10 followers, then 20, but it grew. Clara tagged me in a post. Then the coffee shop. Word spread. Within a year, I'd moved into a bigger space, a warehouse loft with better lighting and more room. I hired 2 part-time helpers, both guys like me who just needed a shot. Orders came faster than I could keep up with. My phone buzzed constantly, and I started turning down work. I wasn't rich, not yet, but I was building something that couldn't be taken from me. Not by failure, not by circumstance, and definitely not by family. One evening, I stood alone in the studio after everyone left. The air was thick with the scent of cedar and fresh varnish. I ran my fingers over the smooth edge of a dining table I'd spent 3 weeks perfecting. I thought about the night I left home, how scared I was, how small I felt. I remembered sitting on the Greyhound with a backpack full of fear and a head full of doubt. And I thought, if they could see me now, would it matter? Would they apologize? Would they even recognize me? But I didn't care about their answers anymore. I had mine. The official moment it all changed wasn't some big ribbon cutting or a viral video or even a TV interview. It was a Tuesday morning, a little after 8, when I unlocked the doors to my new showroom and stood there staring at the polished floors, the high ceilings, and the soft morning light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The space smelled like lemon oil and ambition, and the sign outside now read, "Reclaimed Roots, Artisan Furniture and Design." That was me. My name, my vision, my sweat. A long, wide wooden desk sat near the back wall, and when I sat behind it for the first time, I didn't feel like a fraud. I felt like a man who'd earned every scar on his hands. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building an empire. And for once, the silence in my life wasn't loneliness. It was peace. Within the next few months, the momentum snowballed. We started landing contracts with boutique hotels, interior designers, and even a few corporate offices looking to add a touch of authenticity to their spaces. Those were their words, not mine. I hired full-time staff. Carpenters, customer service reps, delivery drivers. I trained them myself because I remembered what it felt like to be new and underestimated. We held community workshops, hosted art events in the showroom, and donated pieces to local schools. I started speaking at small business panels and mentoring young entrepreneurs. Somewhere in the chaos, I became something I never imagined, a CEO. It sounded surreal every time I heard it. Jason Carter, founder and CEO. And still, not a word from my family. I didn't even realize how much time had passed until Marcus reminded me. We were having lunch on the rooftop of my office building, something we did every other Friday, and he mentioned it casually while scrolling through his phone. "Dude," he said, holding up the screen. "This article says Reclaimed Roots is the largest independent furniture brand in the city. That's wild. You know it's been 4 years since you left." I paused, my fork halfway to my mouth. 4 years. He was right. No calls. No texts. No happy birthday. No are you alive. I should have felt hurt. I should have felt angry, but all I felt was clarity. If they hadn't reached out in 4 years, then they never truly saw me as part of the family in the first place. I had mourned that connection long ago, but the universe has a twisted sense of humor. Because just 2 weeks later, I got a call. Unknown number. Normally, I let those go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Hello, I said cautiously. There was a pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in years. Jason? It's Mom. My stomach clenched, but I kept my voice neutral. Hi. She let out a breath like she'd been holding it for a decade. Hi. I saw an article about you. Your business. It's beautiful. We're proud of you. We. That one word hit me harder than I expected. Not, I'm proud, but we're. As if they'd all been rooting for me this whole time. As if history had no teeth. She said they wanted to visit. Just for a day, she promised. Just me, she added quickly. I just want to see how you're doing. Against every instinct in my body, I said yes. Not because I missed them. Not because I wanted anything from them. But because a small, twisted part of me wanted them to see what they threw away. I wanted them to walk through the doors of my empire and realize exactly what they'd cast aside. It wasn't petty. It was necessary. I needed closure, even if it came dressed as revenge. The day they arrived, I wore my sharpest suit, not for vanity, but for armor. I had the showroom staged to perfection, our best pieces on display, fresh flowers at the reception, the staff dressed like it was a grand opening. I stood near the entrance, waiting, and then the door opened. It wasn't just Mom. She walked in holding a casserole dish, like this was a family reunion, and right behind her was Dad in a polo shirt and Andrew, golden boy himself, in designer sunglasses and a smug expression that hadn't changed since we were kids. I almost laughed. Of course they all came. Of course she lied. Mom went straight in for a hug. I didn't return it. Dad gave me a firm nod, like we were meeting for a business deal. Andrew wandered through the room, running his hand along a walnut coffee table and muttering, "Not bad." Mom kept rambling, commenting on the lighting, the floors, the art. "This place is just stunning, Jason. You did all this yourself." I nodded. She smiled tightly. "We knew you had potential. You just needed to be pushed." Pushed. As if all the belittling, all the silence, all the cruel dismissals had been some kind of secret motivational tactic. We sat in the lounge area, the one with leather chairs and a marble coffee table I designed myself. Dad sipped the complimentary espresso we served clients and looked around like he was evaluating property. "This house," he said suddenly. "It's too nice for just one person. It would be perfect for your younger brother, Andrew." For a moment, I genuinely thought I misheard him. I turned to look at him directly. "What?" He smiled, completely unbothered. "He's thinking of relocating. This would be a great start for him. You've got all this space. You're doing well. He needs a fresh beginning." It was like the air got sucked out of the room. I stared at him, then at Mom, who didn't even flinch. Andrew just shrugged. "It's a nice setup," he said, as if this was some open house. I didn't speak. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I just stood up, pulled my phone from my pocket, and pressed the button for security. 2 guards appeared within seconds. "Please escort my guests out," I said calmly. Mom's jaw dropped. "Jason, what are you doing?" Dad stood up, furious. "You selfish little..." I held up a hand. "We're done here." They yelled. They pleaded. Mom even cried. But I didn't move. I watched as security ushered them out, my father's face red with rage, my brother's expression unreadable. Mom turned one last time at the door. "You've changed," she said, voice trembling. I met her eyes. "No," I said. "You just never really knew me." And then they were gone. I stood alone in the silence, the sound of their departure lingering like smoke after a fire. I took a breath, then another, and I smiled. Not because it felt good, but because it felt over. They had seen me, really seen me, and they still tried to take. That was all the confirmation I needed. I wasn't theirs anymore. I never had been. After they left, the silence hit me like a second wave. Not the peaceful kind I had grown to love over the years, the kind that wrapped around my chest like a soft blanket and made the noise of the world fade, but the sharp, cutting kind that reminded you just how alone you really were in moments like that. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood in the center of the showroom, hands still at my sides, heart thudding like I had just sprinted up a hill. My eyes wandered to the door they had just exited, then over to the chair where my father had sat, like a king surveying land he thought belonged to him. My jaw clenched as the absurdity of his words came back to me. This house is perfect for your younger brother. Like I was just a placeholder. Like my success was a temporary structure meant to be inherited by someone more worthy, someone they never stopped believing in, even when he gave them nothing to believe in. I didn't cry, even though the knot in my throat begged me to. Instead, I paced. I needed motion, something to burn off the weight of their entitlement. I walked through the showroom, past the centerpiece dining table I had crafted from salvaged mahogany, past the intricate bookshelves that had taken me nearly 2 weeks to perfect, past the photos of clients smiling beside their new furniture. This wasn't just a store. It was my blood, my bruises, my rebellion carved into wood and steel. Every nail I hammered, every grain of wood I polished, was a silent act of defiance. They had abandoned me, discarded me, ridiculed me, and I had risen anyway. And yet they still believed they could walk in and claim something I built. That kind of delusion didn't come from arrogance. It came from years of getting away with it. I sat on the edge of the platform bed we had designed for a modern minimalist line. The surface was cool beneath me, the kind of clean symmetry that always calmed my thoughts. But nothing could settle my mind this time. The image of Andrew touching my work, smirking as if he deserved it, turned my stomach. My brother, the golden child who couldn't even hold a job for more than 6 months, wanted to move into my space. And worse, my parents agreed. No hesitation. No shame. It made sense now. The visit had never been about reconnection or pride. It was a reconnaissance mission. They came to see what they could take. I remembered being 14 and overhearing my parents arguing about money. My father's voice, sharp and tired, saying, "We'll just invest in Andrew. Jason's a lost cause." At the time, I didn't even know what that meant. I thought maybe it was just frustration. But now I understood. They had decided long ago that I was expendable, that I was only useful if I could be used. And when I couldn't, they moved on. I had been too young to recognize it then. I wasn't now. Marcus called that evening. He always seemed to know when something was off, even without seeing me. "You good?" he asked, his voice low and steady. I didn't answer right away. "They came," I said eventually. He was quiet for a beat. "All of them?" "Yeah." I could hear the exhale through the phone. "Let me guess, they wanted something." I laughed bitterly. "My house. For Andrew." There was a silence, followed by a string of expletives I won't repeat. Then he added, "You didn't let them stay, did you?" I called security. That made him laugh, and it felt good to hear it. "Damn right you did." He offered to come over, maybe bring dinner, but I told him I needed space. I did. Not because I didn't want comfort, but because I needed to sit with the rage, the grief, the unspoken question that had been building since the day I left home. Why wasn't I ever enough? And the truth, as ugly and freeing as it was, had nothing to do with me. It was them, their limitations, their inability to love without strings. I had spent too many years internalizing their rejection, thinking it reflected something broken in me. But standing in the empire I had built with no one's help but my own, I knew better now. Still, the fallout came quickly. By the next morning, my cousin Tasha had posted something cryptic on Facebook, something about family forgetting where they came from. Then my aunt messaged me directly, saying Mom had called her in tears, saying I threw them out like trash. I didn't respond. I didn't know her an explanation. But the messages kept coming. Friends of the family, old neighbors, people I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had opinions about my boundaries. Some praised me quietly, others judged me loudly. But not one of them had been there when I was 18, eating peanut butter on stale bread because I couldn't afford dinner. Not one of them had helped when I was sleeping on a warehouse floor, hoping the rain wouldn't seep through the roof and ruin my only pair of shoes. I could have posted a response. I could have defended myself. But I didn't. Because real power isn't shouting back. It's knowing you don't have to. I had nothing to prove to anyone. Not anymore. Later that week, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from my mother. The envelope smelled faintly of her perfume, floral and sharp. The note inside was short. She said she didn't expect things to go the way they did. That she hoped I'd find it in my heart to understand. That family was complicated. That I was being too hard. She didn't mention the house, or Andrew, or the years of silence. Just vague sentiment, and a reminder that blood is thicker than water. I didn't reply. I burned the letter in a small metal bin out back, watching the paper curl and blacken until it was nothing but ash. And then I swept it up and threw it away. They call me selfish. They said I was ungrateful. But they never once asked what it cost me to build this life. They never once offered help. Never once apologized. And if standing up for myself now meant being the villain in their story, then so be it. I'd rather be hated for building my own life than loved for giving it away. I thought the worst was behind me once I shut the door on them, literally and metaphorically. But if there's anything I've learned about family, it's that the moment you draw a boundary, some people treat it like a personal attack. They don't see the years that led up to it, the exhaustion behind your eyes, the silent screaming in your chest every time they dismiss you. No, all they see is the wall you built, and suddenly you're the villain for not letting them climb it. Within a few days of throwing my parents and Andrew out, I started seeing the ripple effects. It was like watching a stone drop into a still lake and realizing just how far the circle spread. The first call came from Aunt Geraldine. She had always been the self-appointed family spokesperson, loud, righteous, and conveniently forgetful. "Jason," she said, in that dramatic tone she reserved for funerals and scandals, "I just spoke to your mother. She was devastated. She said you embarrassed them, called security like they were criminals. Is that true?" I didn't answer right away. I just stared at my phone, wondering what kind of mental gymnastics she had to do to take their side. I finally said, "What's true is they showed up after 4 years of silence, asked me to hand over my home to Andrew, and acted like that was normal." She paused, then scoffed. "They didn't mean it that way." I laughed, dry and sharp. "Then how did they mean it, Aunt Jerry?" "Because that's exactly how it sounded." She tried to guilt me, talked about how family should forgive, how parents make mistakes. But she didn't ask what it felt like to be the child they gave up on. She didn't ask how I managed all those years alone. After that, the messages came in waves. Cousins I barely spoke to posted vague status updates about fake success and forgetting your roots. My Uncle Roger texted me a paragraph laced with passive-aggressive Bible verses about honoring your parents. Even my old high school friend Kevin, who used to bum rides off me, sent a DM that said, "Bro, I get you're upset, but throwing your family out? Harsh, man." It was like they all read one script, one that started with denial, moved into guilt-tripping, and ended with thinly veiled resentment. Nobody wanted to talk about what my parents did. They only cared that I had the nerve to respond. Through it all, Marcus was a rock. He didn't press me for details. He didn't try to offer cheap wisdom. He just showed up, sometimes with food, sometimes with silence. We sat on the rooftop one evening, the city buzzing softly below us. He handed me a beer and said, "You good?" I nodded, then shook my head. "I don't know, man. I thought it'd feel better, standing up for myself. But now it's like everyone thinks I'm some cold-hearted bastard." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the skyline. "Yeah, well, they love the quiet version of you. The one who took the hits and smiled. The moment you made noise, they got uncomfortable. That's not your fault." I let those words sit. He was right. For most of my life, I had made myself smaller to fit into the mold they carved out for me. I swallowed their insults, excused their neglect, and convinced myself that being tolerated was the same as being loved. But now that I had claimed space, physical, emotional, professional, they didn't know what to do with me. And because they couldn't control me, they called me selfish, ungrateful, disrespectful, as if respect was something they had ever given me. The final blow came a week later when my mother posted a long, emotional message on Facebook. She didn't name me directly, but everyone knew. She wrote about how some children forget where they come from, how success turns hearts cold, how all we ever wanted was to see him happy, and now we're being punished for loving him too much. The comments were brutal. Relatives chimed in with crying emojis and prayers. One cousin said she was heartbroken to see a family torn apart by pride. A former neighbor mentioned how Jason was always such a sweet boy. What happened? It was surreal, watching my own life get reframed into a melodrama where I was the villain, and they were the wounded saints. I stared at the post for a long time, my hands trembling with equal parts fury and disbelief. I wanted to reply. I wanted to scream, to list every time they ignored me, every insult, every moment they made me feel like a burden. But I didn't, because no matter what I said, they'd twist it. They weren't interested in truth. They wanted a story that made them feel better. So instead, I logged out. I shut my laptop, and I walked into the studio. That night, I started building something I didn't plan to sell. It was a bench, sturdy, unassuming, made of reclaimed oak. As I sanded the edges and lined the grain, I thought about how much strength it takes to stand alone. How people romanticize the idea of making it on your own, but never talk about the loneliness, the grief, the heavy silence that follows every step forward. I poured all of that into the wood. Every cut, every polish, every nail was a release. By the time I was done, the sun was rising and my hands were raw. But I felt lighter. Not healed, not whole, but solid. A few days later, I placed the bench in the showroom with a small plaque that read, "For the ones who made peace with walking away." No one asked who it was for, but every time someone sat on it, I smiled. In the weeks that followed, I stopped checking social media. I let the storm rage on without me. My focus returned to the business, to my team, to the clients who believed in my vision. Every time we completed a new project, I reminded myself, this is real. This is mine. Let them talk. Let them lie. I know the truth. I lived it. And I'm not sorry. I didn't expect peace to be so quiet. Not just the absence of noise, but that deep, internal stillness that comes when you stop apologizing for existing. Weeks had passed since the fallout, and the social media circus had slowed. My name faded from their statuses, and the whispers died down, at least to a level I could comfortably ignore. But the emotional dust was still settling inside me. I found myself staring at my phone sometimes, not to check messages, but just out of habit. A small part of me still waited, for an apology, for accountability, for some kind of acknowledgement that maybe they understood what they had done. But it never came. It probably never would. And as much as that used to gut me, now it just confirmed what I already knew. They never saw me as a person. I was a pawn, a disappointment, a fallback plan if Golden Boy Andrew ran out of options. But now I was something else. I was free. I had a routine now. Wake up early, open the studio, check in with my staff, and then walk through the workshop floor just listening. There's something sacred about the sound of craft, wood being planed, nails being driven, the low hum of conversation between my team. Every piece we made had intention. Every corner joint and dovetail told a story of patience, of effort, of dignity. And it was mine. No one handed this to me. No one opened a door. I built it with scarred hands and sleepless nights. And yet, the word selfish still echoed sometimes, whispered by ghosts I couldn't quite shake. But now, every time it echoed, I had something louder to answer it with. The sound of success earned the hard way. One morning, as I walked past the reclaimed wood shelving unit we'd just installed in the foyer, I noticed a couple admiring it. They were newlyweds decorating their first home. I introduced myself, and the woman's eyes lit up. "You're the owner? We've been following your work for months." "It's beautiful," her husband added. "You can tell it's made by someone who actually cares. That's rare." I thanked them and walked away, my heart full but steady. Compliments like that didn't swell my ego anymore. They grounded me. They reminded me that what I was doing mattered, not just for me, but for every person who walked through our doors looking for something real. That night, Marcus came by with takeout, Thai food from our favorite spot. We sat on the rooftop, legs kicked out, drinks in hand, watching the city lights flicker like stars that forgot they weren't in the sky. After a few bites, he looked at me and asked, "So what now?" I didn't answer right away. I chewed my food, wiped my mouth, and looked out at the skyline. "Now I live," I finally said. Without the weight, without the guilt. I moved forward. He nodded, then raised his beer. To forward. I clinked my bottle against his. We didn't need to say much. That's the thing about real friends. They don't require a performance. Still, the wound hadn't fully closed. I kept the letter Mom sent, the one I'd burned, from my mind most days, but it haunted me in quieter moments. Not because I regretted destroying it, but because it reminded me that no matter how much I healed, I would never get the closure I once craved. There would be no heartfelt apology, no teary-eyed reunion. I had grieved the loss of my family while they were still alive, and that kind of mourning doesn't come with a funeral. It lingers, invisible and unspoken, like background noise you've grown used to. I saw Andrew once after everything. I was at a downtown event hosted by a local art gallery, networking, shaking hands, pretending to enjoy the complimentary wine. He walked in with some tech startup crowd, still dressed like success was something you wore instead of earned. Our eyes met. He raised his glass and gave me a smirk, as if none of it had happened, as if we were just brothers passing in a room. I didn't smile back. I didn't nod. I just turned and walked away. Because that's the thing about healing. It teaches you who no longer deserves access. And I wasn't about to give him a second chance to devalue me. The next morning, I went to the studio earlier than usual. I unlocked the doors, flipped on the lights, and stood in the quiet. Then I walked to the back corner, pulled out a fresh plank of maple, and began sketching. Not for a client. Not for the showroom. For me. It was going to be a chair, solid, minimal, elegant. Something that could hold weight without creaking. Something that lasted. Just like me. As I worked, I thought about the last 4 years, the heartbreak, the hustle, the solitude. I thought about the first night in that rundown garage, when I had nothing but a blanket, a dream, and the bitter taste of my father's voice in my ear. Good for nothing. And now here I was, shaping wood with steady hands, building a future from the ruins they left behind. The irony wasn't lost on me. The son they abandoned had become the man they wanted to use. But it was too late. I had learned the most important lesson of all. I didn't owe them anything. Not my time. Not my space. Not my forgiveness. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by love, by respect, by presence. And by those standards, they had disqualified themselves long ago. I didn't hate them. I didn't wish them harm. But I wouldn't let them back in. My boundaries weren't punishment. They were protection. And every day I enforced them, I chose myself a little more. That afternoon, I finished the chair. I sat in it. Solid. Balanced. Unshakable. Just like me. If you've ever had to walk away from people who were supposed to love you, but only showed up when it was convenient, you are not alone. Let this story remind you. Your boundaries are not betrayal. They are survival. If this resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that speak truth to pain, power, and self-preservation. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. Your voice matters. See you soon in the next story.